Here we go. Hi, everybody. This is Ellen Bristol. Most of you already know me. Just in case you don't, I founded Bristol Strategy Group in 1995, 23 years ago, which I'm mentioning for a specific reason. And today I have the truly great pleasure and honor of having a conversation with George Khaldun. Say hello to everybody, George.
Hi.
George and I met recently through a great coincidence and serendipity. And I want you to know that George Khaldun is the co-founder of Harlem Children's Zone, a truly renowned social initiative that has transformed the lives of thousands of people in a tremendously challenged part of the world. Harlem Children's Zone was also founded in 1995, 23 years ago, which George and I just discovered. So I'd like to ask George to say a few words about his experience in founding the HCZ. And then I want to ask him a question. So George, give us a little background on you.
Hi, my name is George Khaldun. Ellen has really adequately introduced me. About 25 years ago, actually, Jeff and I had sat down and we began to look at all the negative data that was in Harlem, high school, dropouts, dirty streets, drugs, crime, and you name it. And
for our listeners, let's remind them that Jeff is Geoffrey Canada.
Yes, Geoffrey Canada, my partner. We met at Bowdoin College back in 1973. In fact, we graduated together. Back then, we would always talk about how can we change society. And I was at Columbia getting a master's degree a few years later, and I ran into Jeff, and Jeff said, I just became the president of this organization, and we're going to bring about some real changes in Harlem. I said, okay, give me 6 months, I'll be out of school, and let's go build Harlem and change the world. So one of the things we did, we said, look, before we do anything, let's collect the data and find out what the actual data sets are in Harlem. So we went to the Department of Education, the city of New York, and we found out how many kids were dropping out of school. We looked at the housing. We went to the housing department, and we found out how many buildings were coming apart and all the problems we were having. And we also went to the police department and realized that hundreds of kids were going to jail for different types of crimes. And so we said, we have to do something about this. So we got all the data together and we analyzed it and we wrote a report. We wrote our own RFP. We said, these are the problems and these are the things we wanted to do. We wanted to set up a Head Start program, which would give mothers and children an understanding. So when the kids go to school, they go to school on grade level. And we said we're going to develop a number of quality after-school programs. And we said in 6 years, we want to try to build our own school. And we developed this proposal, our RFP, with the data. And we went from foundation to foundation, and most of them didn't like the fact that we were coming with our own RFP, with our own data laid out. But we had two people who were interested. George Soros, the famous financier, who said these numbers match, and Ed McConnell Clark Foundation. They looked at the data. They said, you guys really have collected data, and it looks like you could really pull this together. So we collected the data, developed the programs, and Harlem Children's Zone has taken off since. And we have currently, we're able to build 2 schools. We have about 1,200 kids in our high schools, and we work with about another 500 or 600 kids in after-school programs, and 800 kids have recently graduated from college, and we have about another 1,000 kids who are in college right now because we track them all the way from pre-K straight through to college. So those are some, and then we have a budget now of about $150 million.
Oh, wow.
And we have a endowment of about $50 million. So we want this program to go on forever in terms of improving the quality of life for young people in Harlem.
This is so exciting. I thought I knew the whole story, but apparently I didn't. And one thing that excites me about this tale is I remember Harlem. I remember Harlem in the 70s. I remember Harlem in the 60s because I went to Columbia for my undergraduate.
Yeah.
I lived in Manhattan most of my adult life until I moved to Florida about 30 years ago. And if you had called me up back when you and Jeff started this project and said, so Ellen, we're really going to change Harlem, I would have probably said, good luck, in a cynical way, thinking, Harlem's already dead. It's already gone. Where in that community are these two guys going to find support? But what really interests me is that you got an awful lot of advice telling you this project couldn't succeed. It wasn't just the RFPs and and conventional funding sources.
Right.
I want to know why you decided not to pay any attention to that advice.
Because we felt that what was more important was to have a solid RFP, a solid strategy and plan. And we felt that if we can sell the plan, we would get the money. Because oftentimes, because the foundations, normally they would give money and then there's nothing happens at the end because there's no data to support it. We felt that by having data, sound plan, and good management, that we would be able to raise the money and make the changes. One of the things we insisted on after about 3 years, we brought on an in-house evaluator. And this in-house evaluator was able to, number one, to get respect with the funders that would come later on because they saw we were very serious about the data. Mm-hmm. And we said, we're going to let data drive the program. Meaning that if we want to work, we said in year 4, we're going to be working with 3,000 kids, and those 3,000 kids will be on grade level. And year 5, we're going to be working with 5,000 junior high school kids who will be ready to go to high school. So we set certain goals. In fact, we had over 100 goals that we wanted to have for our children and for their parents and for the community in general.
This it really excites me. I actually bill myself as a nut for metrics and a performance management geek. So I recognize something in what you're doing here, that you established measurements based on that initial data that said, this is how well we don't currently perform against these desirable standards. Truancy rates, graduation rates, working at grade level, parental involvement, and so on.
Yes.
You saw that the data at launch was very undesirable and said, okay, if we do these things these ways and hold ourselves accountable to the data and never fail to maintain accountability.
Yes, that's what we did. We were very purposeful. We were really purposeful about, number one, not only having metrics against the data in terms of what we were going to produce 5 years out, 10 years out, every year. And it was my job as a chief operating officer at that time to make sure it gets done. As you know, Ellen, you can have the most beautiful plan, the most gorgeous strategy, but if you don't execute, and every year it was my job to make sure we met the metrics, because we said in year 3, we would be working with 80% of children newborn to 4 years old in 3 years. And we did 85, we made those numbers. And then we said in 6 years, we're going to be working that 6th graders, all of our 6th graders will be on grade, 70% of our 6th graders will be on grade level. So those are the type of metrics we held ourselves to.
And I bet by holding yourself so rigorously to those standards, you started to discover some of the less scientific results, a sense of hopefulness,
Yes.
better, kinder, more loving family relationships, children with better self-esteem, with a sense that they owned their lives.
Absolutely.
You did see that stuff, right?
And a lot of that came from going back to the leadership. The leadership was people were able to see that the leader were sincere, they were authentic, meaning that Jeff would always talk about him growing up in the South Bronx, poor, among poor housing, drug addicts, kids dropping out of school, women, girls getting pregnant, and how he said when he was a little boy that he wanted to make a change when he grew up. So people were able to empathize with his story, and they still empathize with his story.
Right.
Because an authentic leader has to show passion. And when not only the people we work with, but when staff are able to see that the leader is really serious about bringing about change and improving the quality of life and eliminating generational poverty, then the staff buys in to the overall theory and strategy. So building a good staff was another part of what we are trying to do at the Harlem Children's Zone.
I really think this is so pertinent. I didn't say this in our introduction, but George and I have so much to talk about that we decided this is going to be the first of a series of, I don't know, video blogs, whatever you want to call them, because we have too much to talk about, and none of you out there in listener land are going to pay attention to us for longer than 20 minutes. So I wanted to bring this conversation, because it's so exciting to me, down to some of the stuff we're now seeing from our perspective. I have been puzzling ever since I got involved in the nonprofit sector, since I don't have a nonprofit background. I have a sales background in corporate America. And I've been puzzling for years over why organizations that have phenomenal missions and great vision and really fill a purpose struggle for 23 years to reach their first million, if they ever get there. And it really hurts me to hear and see and read the posts about people who feel their work as staff isn't valued and they can't earn a decent wage, and the organizations are constantly struggling to secure a level of financial health. And it seems like you and Jeff said, we're going to make sure we're adequately funded so we can do what we need to do. So I have a question for you. I shared with you earlier today some of the data we've obtained through our 7-year project called the Leaky Bucket Assessment for Effective Fundraising. And you made all the right noises. The final statement of the Leaky Bucket examines, it's the people can choose more than one option. What are your standard responses when fundraising results fall below desired levels? And so we don't have to show people graphs. Let me just quickly summarize. About 25% of the respondents had no answers. About 10% of the respondents said, fire the chief development guy. A few people said, do more training, or work on our value proposition, our case for support. The most troubling statistics were that about 50% of all respondents said, throw more special fundraising events. You had a pretty strong reaction to that. And I'd love you to share what your reaction was and why, and then we can talk about why we both think this is so important.
Well, my reaction was so strong because I felt that it was important for the leadership to develop a strategy that would meet their needs or meet the needs of their organization, as opposed to just having another fundraiser. It's up to the leader to design and come up with a concept that's workable. If it's not working, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the leader in terms of developing the approach and the people he has or she has hired to implement their overall strategy. So it's critical to sit down and reevaluate why things went wrong. Another series of fundraisers, who's coming to those fundraisers? What happened to the fundraiser we had last week and 2 weeks before and 4 weeks before? Why were they failures?
Right.
There's a problem with the overall strategy in terms of who are we asking to come to these fundraisers?
And are we following up with them to get them more deeply engaged?
Absolutely. Do we have the right people to follow up and to contact our potential funders? So it's a question of overall strategy and who do we have following up to make sure we get the right people to come to the fundraiser. So I think it's a whole question of looking in detail what went wrong, number one, and number two, making adjustments and changes for your next event if you think that's the way you want to go. And also you got to look at your board of directors. What is your board doing in terms of helping to raise the money for your organization? There's some things that could be discussed.
There are many things that can be discussed, and even if your board members don't know affluent people or don't want to be perceived as asking for money, board members have so much to offer in terms of their perceived authority just to say thank you.
Absolutely.
Just to have a conversation, bring somebody in for a facility tour, introduce them to one of your stars who's graduated from college and gone on to do something that's socially impactful.
That's exactly what we do, by the way, but go ahead.
I love it. I'd like to drill down just a little bit into this and talk about this particular example of throwing fundraiser after fundraiser instead of leadership saying, let's tear this apart and figure out what isn't working and try a different strategy. It strikes me that this is a twofold problem. It's a leadership problem and it's a management problem.
Yes.
So can you talk about the management component of this problem?
The management part of the problem is this. Managers have to set goals for the staff. Say we're going to have a dinner and we want to raise $100,000. And we have 6 months to do this. He has a staff or she has a staff of 5 people. Number one, and they come up with a strategy, the manager has to make sure that the staff is able to bring in at least $50,000 or $20,000 a week. If you're not making $20,000 a week, why? Why? Whose job is it? And to make sure that the people in place, if Ann or Barry is supposed to talk to 20 people, right?
Did he do it?
Yes, and did he do it? And how much did he raise from those 20 people?
Right.
It's up to the manager to make sure that the execution of the overall strategy is working. And if it's not working, it's up to the manager to bring that back to the president and they're to sit down to make adjustments to make sure that the 5 people could bring in their $5,000 or whatever. So it's a question of execution of the strategy that is happening. So it's the manager's job. As me, as the chief operating officer at Harlem Children's Home, it was my job to make sure that by year 5, we were working with 5,000 kids. It was my job to do it.
And you have to look at all aspects.
Absolutely.
The door opened on time. Is the phone answered appropriately?
Yeah.
And all the more elevated stuff. So 2 questions, and then let's bring this to a halt, and we'll plan our next one. Question 1, I've often heard from smaller organizations, we don't have a big enough staff, we can't afford to do all that. Having a small staff or being reliant on an all-volunteer army, in my opinion, that doesn't excuse people from the need to have rigorous management. What's your take, even if you have an all-volunteer staff?
I totally agree. At one point, I had some volunteers, but it was my job, number one, to make sure they stayed, because they come and go, whatever. Had to make sure that whatever we asked them to do was done. And if the staff is not responding, it's my job to, number one, to give them more training, or to let them go and bring in someone else. So it's up to the management team to keep an eye on the ball, meaning that are we achieving goals or we're not achieving that particular goal. So it's up to the manager to be able to, he or she is the hands-on person. He's the one who stays up at night, right? He's the one who doesn't get much sleep. He's the one, or she's the one who gets in early in the morning before everyone gets there and the last one to leave. She is the one to make sure that things happen. And when they're not happening, he or she is the one to get on that problem, look at the problem right away, and make the adjustments that have to be made.
There's an axiom that I've heard many times about management and lousy results. And it states, great managers welcome poor results. They welcome poor results because they use undesirable results as a prompt to determine what's going on behind the screen, to tear the problem down and improve the process so that they can achieve a better result in the next cycle.
Absolutely.
That makes sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense. It's up to the manager to, number one, correct the errors, okay? And that comes in a number of ways. Correcting the errors could be a number of things. Additional training, or you just have to fire somebody. The manager has to be able to fire that person who's not performing and do the job him or herself until they hire the next person. They have to be authentic, meaning that they have to let the staff know that this project is very dear to me, it's dear to our company, and we expect you to give us 110%. And if you can't give us the 110%, then we'll move on to the next person.
If you can't give us the 110%, 120%, maybe this isn't a good marriage.
Absolutely.
And it's no harm, no foul.
Right.
Something we've noticed whenever we work with our clients to help them raise their levels of accountability for staff performance.
Right.
Somebody ends up, not every case, but it's not uncommon for somebody to say, this isn't for me. I don't want to be held accountable. But you guys had a really, how do I put it without sounding too icky? If you didn't start rescuing the next generation of children in Harlem, it was really it was something serious going on there. It's as serious as a heart attack to address the problems of poverty. And if that's why I feel so much pain for so many nonprofits who flail about because they haven't grasped this notion that it's okay to challenge yourself. It's okay to challenge your staff.
Yeah.
And I think somehow that has a spillover effect to your clients because they see the evidence of your team's commitment to the mission.
Yeah, and one of the things when I'm talking to someone who is just not making the grade, I say, look, obviously this is not working for you. You haven't made your numbers in 3 weeks or 3 months, and it's not working for me.
Mm-hmm.
We're both hurting, right?
Right.
And so I said, since we're both hurting, I think it's best that you move on. Because the person who really getting hurt is Johnny, who's left back in the 5th grade because we weren't on top of his grades.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
That's what hurts me, and it hurts our organization. But this is not the work for you, and it's hurting you, and it's hurting me. So it's best that we part.
I think that's great. And sometimes those people can do a much better job in another role.
Absolutely.
On the bus. And I don't believe George is the kind of slash and burn manager that so many of us are afraid of. Oh, he's only there to make my life miserable. But the mission is more important than anything else. So tolerating poor performance without tearing that performance apart to figure out where the root cause of poor performance is, it's just not on.
Yeah, and one of the things Jeff used to always tell us and tell our staff, he says, look, these people are poor. They've been given a bad deck of cards. They're living poor home conditions. They're dropped out of school, and nobody cares for them. And you, who are helping us, you have a degree, which means that you can go someplace else and have a good living. But our people that we're supposed to be helping will continue to suffer. And the vicious cycle of poverty will go on because of you didn't do your job. So before we allow this to go on, we will ask you to move to another area or go to get another job.
Fantastic. So I am thrilled about this, George. I think, how about if we end on this note that management, not managers, but right, great management practices are what enable a functioning nonprofit organization to fulfill its mission.
Agreed, totally.
So let's gather again and next time talk about why so many nonprofits are not stepping up their management game.
Okay.
Is that okay with you? Is that a good agenda topic to end on?
Great.
Well, I cannot thank you enough. This is a delight. And everybody, I'm warning you, the Ellen and George show is coming to a computer near you. Thanks so much. And real quick, if you have any questions for me or for George, you can reach me by email at our website, ellen@bristolstrategygroup.com. And you can reach George at
gkhaldun@gmail.com.
And George, spell your last name because I don't think everybody knows.
It's KHALDUN @gmail.com.
Thanks so much. Thanks. This has just been wonderful, George.
Thank
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.